It began with a sealed folder discovered in a forgotten NATO storage unit outside Mons, Belgium, an inventory ledger stamped "Restricted Winter Vault." Inside were brittle shipping manifests, cryptographic intercepts, and a single faded photograph of a convoy frozen into the North Sea ice, its hulls marked only with ghostly German runes. The year was 1945, but the evidence was logged in 1952 by an officer whose name was later erased from all personnel records. What began as a supply run in the final days of the Reich may have concealed the last desperate gamble of Nazi science, cargo so dangerous, every trace of its journey was buried beneath the Cold War silence. Chapter 1: Operation Wintervolt, the Lost Convoy. In late January 1945, the North Sea was a graveyard of steel. The Third Reich was collapsing on all fronts, and Admiral Karl Dönitz's remaining U-boat command was scrambling to protect what little remained of the Kriegsmarine supply network. Amid the chaos, an encrypted communique was transmitted from Kiel Naval Command to the headquarters of the 24th U-boat flotilla. The message, decrypted years later by British codebreakers, contained a simple but chilling directive: initiate winter vault. Cargo priority absolute. No record to surface channels. The file bore the signature of Rear Admiral Otto Schreiber, a logistics officer whose name vanished from all German archives after May 1945. The convoy, designated Gruppe Eisbär, departed Kiel on the night of February 4, 1945, under blackout conditions. It consisted of 3 cargo vessels, the Sonderlicht, Greifswalder, and Nordmeer, escorted by 2 Type 7 U-boats. Witnesses from coastal batteries at Flensburg noted the unusual composition of the fleet. No surface escort destroyers, no Luftwaffe cover, and ships modified with reinforced holds and radiation-shielded compartments. Surviving dock workers later testified in 1951 to Allied intelligence that the holds were loaded under armed SS supervision, sealed with lead and stamped with the Black Sun insignia of the Schutzstaffel's Ahnenerbe Division. One crate in particular was recorded as weighing 4.7 tons and marked with the cryptic code UR235 Alpha. The journey was expected to last 3 days, with the convoy scheduled to rendezvous with an awaiting submarine tender near Narvik, Norway. But somewhere north of the Skagerrak Strait, the fleet vanished. No distress calls were intercepted, no survivors recovered. British Royal Air Force Coastal Command reported faint radar returns before losing contact over an area now referred to in military logs as Sector Icefield. At the time, Allied intelligence dismissed the disappearance as yet another wartime loss. But after the war, in 1948, a Norwegian fishing trawler discovered fragments of hull plating along the Vestfjorden coast, warped and blackened, as though melted from within. Declassified. Documents from the British Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Centre, OIC, reference these fragments in file. OIC 452907. Handwritten note attached to the report reads, "Chemical contamination, advised disposal." When examined decades later, metallurgical analysis confirmed the presence of uranium oxide residue and trace isotopes of barium, materials consistent with early nuclear experimentation. It was enough to reopen the case, if only quietly, within NATO's Clandestine Research and Security Division, RSD. Their conclusion, classified at the highest level, suggested that the Germans may have been transporting enriched uranium to a hidden research facility in Norway, a final attempt to salvage the Reich's nuclear ambitions before total surrender. In 1952, an Anglo-Norwegian dive expedition under Operation Frostline attempted to locate the remains of the convoy. Using early sonar equipment, they detected 3 large anomalies approximately 90 meters below the surface, 14 nautical miles off Bodo. Divers reported unusually strong magnetic interference, causing compasses and depth gauges to malfunction. 2 men, Lieutenant Harold Vance and Petty Officer Arne Bjørnsen, failed to resurface during the second descent. Their bodies were recovered 2 days later. Both exhibited severe radiation burns and abnormal blistering on exposed skin. The official report cited compressive trauma due to equipment failure. But internal memos between the Royal Navy and US Naval Intelligence, ONEI, paint a different picture. An intercepted cable from ONI Section X, dated October 12, 1952, reads, "Exposure consistent with isotopic source contamination. Halt all recovery. Contain incident." Curiously, Soviet naval archives obtained after the fall of the USSR include a classified dispatch from February 15, 1945, reporting that Northern Fleet submarines detected an unauthorized German convoy operating near their patrol zone. The report, signed by Admiral Nikolai Kuznetsov, mentions non-standard radiation readings detected by sensor buoys, a remarkable observation considering the limited radiation detection capabilities of the era. Moscow ordered immediate interception, but when Soviet vessels arrived, only slicks of oil and drifting crates remained. Among the recovered debris was a lead cylinder containing fragments of coded German documents, most of which were unreadable due to seawater damage. One legible section mentioned the phrase Project Morgenlicht, Morning Light Project, and referenced a secondary destination north of Tromsø. Following the war, Allied intelligence quietly combed through German scientific records, searching for evidence of Morgenlicht. None was found. However, a 1946 OSS briefing titled Captured German Research, Nordic Division includes a peculiar addendum. SS scientific staff missing Dr. Klaus Hollen, physicist, Project Morgenlicht supervisor, presumed deceased, last seen departing Kiel 3rd of February 1945 aboard Greifswalder. Dr. Hollen had previously been attached to the Uranverein, Germany's failed atomic research program. His disappearance coincides exactly with the launch of Winter Vault. The mystery deepened in 1991 when a joint NATO survey team, investigating Cold War-era wreckage in the Norwegian Sea, inadvertently located remnants of a steel structure matching Kriegsmarine cargo specifications from 1944. Embedded within the wreck were lead-lined crates still intact. Radiation readings spiked immediately upon approach, forcing the operation to cease. One diver, identified only as Subject 27 in the after-action log, suffered acute radiation sickness and was later evacuated to Ramstein Air Base. All documentation regarding the dive was reclassified under NATO Security Directive NSD 218A, pertaining to materials of strategic atomic interest. Over the years, fragments of information continued to surface. In 2003, a German journalist named Erich Damm uncovered an old ledger from the Kiel shipyards listing repairs for the Sonderlicht. One entry stood out: hull modification per SS directive, magnetic shielding, Beestoff alloy, installed, Jan. 23. Beestoff was the code name for a liquid oxygen-based propellant used in the V2 rocket program, indicating possible connections between the convoy's cargo and late-stage missile development. This revelation suggested that Wintervolt may have been not merely a nuclear transport, but an attempt to move experimental propulsion components, potentially hybrid technologies the Allies never recovered. When Damm's article was published in Der Spiegel, he received multiple anonymous communications warning him to abandon the investigation. 2 months later, Damm was found dead in his Hamburg apartment. The official cause was listed as carbon monoxide poisoning, though neighbors reported the smell of ozone and burnt electronics. His computer hard drives were missing. The investigation was quietly closed within weeks. Today, Norwegian naval authorities continue to restrict civilian exploration of the designated ice field sector. Maritime navigation charts list it simply as prohibited, magnetic anomaly, zone. Satellite imaging remains inconclusive due to persistent interference. Independent researchers attempting to map the seabed report distorted sonar returns and unexplained power losses. Despite the decades of silence, the ocean keeps its secrets. What began as a missing convoy has evolved into one of the most classified enigmas of the 20th century. Somewhere beneath the freezing currents of the Norwegian Sea lies the wreckage of Operation Winter Vault, the Reich's final secret. Whether its purpose was to transport nuclear material, experimental propulsion systems, or something more obscure remains uncertain. But one fact endures through every fragment of record and whispered account. 5 ships left Kiel on February 4th, 1945. None ever returned. And every government that has come close to uncovering the truth has chosen, without exception, to seal it away once more beneath the cold and silence of the sea. Chapter 2: The Black Room of Bern. In the post-war haze of 1946, amid the fragile reconstruction of Europe, rumors began to surface among Western intelligence circles of a secret facility buried beneath the Swiss Federal Archives in Bern. The whispers called it the Black Room, a hidden chamber where the Swiss Federal Police had allegedly collected and decoded both Axis and Allied communications throughout the war. To the public, Switzerland was a neutral island in a world of fire, a nation of diplomats and bankers, but neutrality in practice had a price. Beneath the facade of impartiality, Bern had quietly become Europe's silent broker of secrets. The earliest reference to the Black Room appears in a 1948 memorandum issued by the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, marked confidential, file number X21346. The memo, addressed to Washington by Station Bern's outgoing chief, reads, "Swiss neutrality leveraged as cover for clandestine intercept network. Facility confirmed within Federal Archives compound. Function, cryptographic clearinghouse and code exchange for both Axis and Allied sources. Recommend surveillance before decommission." The document was buried within the OSS's post-war microfilm archives, classified until 1999. When it was finally released under the Freedom of Information Act, most of the text had been redacted except for one phrase, circled in blue pencil. Operation Mirrorline, approval pending. Contemporary witnesses later described how the Black Room operated during the height of the war. Beneath the archival complex on Papier-Müller-Straße, a sealed sub-basement housed rows of signal intercept machines, Enigma decoders, and captured cipher devices from multiple nations. According to an internal report by the Swiss Intelligence Bureau, codenamed Bureau H, the operation's official mission was to protect national communications security. But former employees, interviewed anonymously in the 1970s, painted a different picture. Swiss technicians had been intercepting encrypted radio traffic from Berlin, London, and even Washington, then selling decoded material to both sides under separate arrangements. The financial ledger of the Swiss National Bank from 1942 to 1945 shows unaccounted gold transfers totaling 37 million Swiss francs, deposited into accounts linked to Confederation Federal Asset Protection Division. Historians have long speculated that these transfers were payments for intelligence provided through the Black Room. In effect, Switzerland had turned neutrality into a marketplace of information, operating as the central exchange for Europe's wartime espionage economy. One figure dominated these operations, Inspector General Hans Gessner, head of the Federal Police during the war. Gessner's personal notebooks, discovered by his grandson in 1989, contain cryptic entries referencing Intercept 45C and Night Meeting English Envoy. A line written on March 7, 1944, reads, "Received sealed file, signature resembles WSC, discussion, peace channels via Stockholm route." Researchers believe the initials refer to Winston S. Churchill. If genuine, this entry suggests that clandestine feelers for peace between Britain and Germany were funneled through Swiss intelligence, with the Black Room serving as intermediary. Another fragment, preserved in the same notebook, lists BR-42 Salt alongside coordinates pointing to the Geneva lakefront. The code was initially indecipherable, but modern analysis suggests it might refer to Bern Room, 1942 SALT protocol. Declassified CIA files confirm that SALT was an early designation for a covert diplomatic backchannel dealing with the redistribution of Axis scientists after the war, a precursor to what would later become known as Operation Paperclip. The connection between SALT and the Black Room implies that the Swiss may have facilitated early negotiations for the transfer of German scientific personnel to Allied custody, possibly even before Germany's surrender. In 1952, amid growing Cold War paranoia, Swiss officials abruptly sealed off the lower levels of the Federal Archives, citing structural instability. Within days, all surviving Black Room files were removed to an undisclosed location. Public records show no authorization for the removal. The following week, Hans Gessner resigned from his post and retired to a private estate near Lake Thun, where he died under mysterious circumstances in 1957. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, though his body was cremated before autopsy. An unmarked folder later found in his estate contained fragments of film reels labeled Intercept, 77 Unthinkable. Historians now believe this referred to Operation Unthinkable, the classified Allied plan drafted by Churchill in 1945 to launch a preemptive war against the Soviet Union. The existence of those reels raises an uncomfortable question. How did a Swiss official acquire documents belonging to the British War Cabinet? One plausible theory, advanced by historian Dr. Klaus Riedel, posits that the Black Room functioned as an intermediary intelligence broker, collecting transmissions through the Swiss embassy network, decrypting them with captured Enigma machines, and distributing summaries to both Allied and Axis representatives under strict anonymity. They were not spies in the conventional sense, Riedel wrote in his 2004 monograph. They were traders, dealers in truths too dangerous for either side to admit possessing. Further evidence emerged in 2013 when a retired archivist named Emil Vogeli publicly claimed he had once been tasked with transferring microfilm canisters from the Federal Archives sub-basement to a private bank vault in Zurich in 1952. He described the canisters as reels of intercepted messages, bearing the marking BR42 Salt. Within weeks of his revelation, Vogeli died in what authorities called an accidental fall down his apartment stairwell. His apartment was ransacked, though nothing appeared stolen except for a set of metal keys identified by his landlord as belonging to old archive cabinets. The Black Room's traces fade into bureaucratic oblivion after that. By the late 1960s, no official reference to Bureau H or any associated intelligence structure remained in Swiss government records. Yet a handful of foreign documents hint at its continuing shadow influence. A CIA field report from 1968 references a Swiss silent service facilitating East-West data exchanges concerning atomic proliferation. A British GCHQ memo from 1971 mentions reliable Swiss intercepts on Soviet naval cipher traffic and notes that materials obtained likely via legacy Black Room channels. Even as the Cold War matured, the ghost of Bern's secret chamber seemed to linger beneath the polished neutrality of Swiss diplomacy. In 2019, Swiss investigative journalists from Neue Zürcher Zeitung requested access to sealed Federal Archive sections under the Freedom of Information Act. The government denied the petition, citing national security relevance under Article 7 of the Federal Confidentiality Code. When pressed, an unnamed official admitted that certain wartime communication artifacts were stored off-site in a secure heritage facility. The refusal only deepened suspicions that the Black Room, or remnants of it, still existed in some capacity, perhaps not as an operational intelligence node, but as an archive too revealing to ever be opened. No photographs of the Black Room have ever surfaced. Only one description remains, recorded by a visiting French cryptographer in 1944. A windowless chamber with machines that whispered without pause, feeding on the world's secrets. On the wall hung a clock without hands. Time did not pass there. Today, beneath the calm streets of Bern, the foundations of the Federal Archives rest on layers of sealed concrete and forgotten tunnels. The city's government denies any knowledge of their wartime use, yet old maintenance blueprints show conduits leading downward, terminating in an unmarked vault chamber that has never been officially surveyed. What lies behind that sealed door, reels of intercepts, coded letters, perhaps evidence of neutral Switzerland's most profitable duplicity, remains an unanswered question. If the Black Room truly functioned as the heart of Europe's wartime intelligence economy, then its silence has outlasted empires, alliances, and wars. Somewhere in the darkness below Bern, the hum of forgotten machines may still linger, echoing the conversations of a continent that sold its secrets to survive. Chapter 3: Echoes from the Wernicke Tunnels. The Harz Mountains in central Germany hold many ghosts of the Reich, but none more elusive than the remnants of Project Wernicke. The story begins in the winter of 1944, when the German war machine, facing total collapse, redirected vast resources underground. Operation Regenbogen, Rainbow, authorized the transfer of advanced research from bombed-out cities to subterranean complexes hidden beneath Thuringia and the Harz Range. Among them was a site designated Wernicke, supposedly an extension of the Mittelwerk Fatu production tunnels near Nordhausen. Yet unlike Mittelwerk, Wernicke never appeared on any Allied reconnaissance maps, nor in post-war interrogations of captured engineers. For decades it was assumed a fabrication, until 1961. That year, during a routine East German geological survey near the abandoned town of Elbingerode, seismic crews detected a hollow chamber extending nearly 100 meters beneath the forest floor. The GDR Ministry for State Security, Stasi, immediately cordoned off the area, citing geological instability. But internal Stasi memos, declassified after 1989, reveal something different. An order from Colonel Erich Mielke to secure military-industrial remains of significant strategic potential. Within weeks, Soviet engineers from the 6th Directorate arrived with drilling rigs and portable radiation sensors. Their initial readings showed abnormal gamma emissions and magnetic disturbances inconsistent with natural formations. The site was classified as Object 1276W and disappeared from public record for nearly 30 years. The first true reference to Project Wernicke surfaced in 1992, when former East German archivist Ingrid Petermann leaked a cache of microfilms from the defunct Ministry of State Security. Among them was a 1945 document marked Geheime Kommandosache, top secret, bearing the heading Projekt Wernicke, Forschung an neuartigen Resonanzsystemen. The translation read, Research on Novel Resonance Systems. Attached schematics depicted cylindrical chambers lined with magnetic coils and what appeared to be neural interface devices, electrode caps wired to oscillation generators. Notes referenced synchronization trials conducted on Category P subjects transferred from the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp. The surviving fragments were unsigned, though one page bore the initials KH, likely Dr. Karl Hayden, an SS physicist known to have collaborated with the Ahnenerbe's Institute for Electrophysiological Research, Allied. Intelligence had suspected for years that Nazi scientists experimented with electromagnetic wave research beyond radar technology. Reports from 1945 by the Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, mention biophysical resonance studies conducted at unknown facilities near the Harz. However, no evidence surfaced at the time. When Petermann's documents came to light, researchers noticed that the listed frequency range, between 7.3 and 8.1 Hz, corresponded to the natural resonance of the human brain's alpha rhythm. This led some to believe that Wernicke's goal was not weaponry, but psychological manipulation, attempting to induce compliance or hallucination through electromagnetic entrainment. After the Stasi collapse, Western journalists and amateur explorers flocked to the region around Elbingerode. They found little, just rusted ventilation shafts and collapsed tunnels overgrown by moss. But in 1994, a team from the University of Göttingen's Institute of Geophysics conducted an independent survey. Using ground-penetrating radar, they discovered an extensive network of reinforced corridors stretching beneath the Harz Plateau, converging toward a sealed steel door 40 meters underground. Attempts to open it failed. When researchers returned the following week, the access shaft had been filled with concrete. Local officials claimed it was a safety measure ordered by the Forestry Department, though no record of the directive exists. In 2001, a Norwegian historian named Lars Bekkering uncovered declassified American aerial reconnaissance photographs taken during Operation Lusty in May 1945. Among them were several infrared images of the Harz region showing intense heat signatures from subterranean sources, weeks after Germany's surrender. Bekkering cross-referenced the coordinates with modern satellite imagery and identified them as the same area later sealed by East German authorities. His findings suggested that something within those tunnels remained active well into the Cold War. Testimonies from local residents add chilling texture. Several elderly villagers recall Soviet trucks arriving nightly throughout 1962, their cargo covered with tarpaulins, guarded by soldiers wearing chemical protection gear. The convoys stopped abruptly after an underground explosion shook the valley on December 9, 1962. The Stasi sealed the area immediately. No official report exists, but seismic stations in Leipzig recorded a tremor equivalent to a detonation of roughly 2 tons of TNT, far too powerful for mining equipment. Soviet engineers declared the zone contaminated and permanently restricted access. In 2010, the German Federal Archives released additional fragments of correspondence between the Soviet 6th Directorate and East Germany's Ministry for Heavy Industry. One telegram dated January 7, 1963 reads, "Resonance system compromised. Containment breached. All personnel evacuated. Do not reopen site." That same file mentions an unidentified artifact, D3, described as a spherical composite, mass-emitting continuous harmonic field. Its composition was non-ferrous and non-magnetic, yet capable of inducing auditory distortions in nearby observers. Whether this was a piece of Nazi technology or a misinterpreted natural phenomenon remains unknown. Curiously, post-reunification mapping projects by the Bundeswehr in 1995 recorded unexplained electromagnetic anomalies over the Elbingerode region. interference severe enough to disrupt GPS and radio communication. Civilian exploration remains prohibited, with warning signs citing unexploded ordnance. However, one leaked Bundeswehr memo obtained by Der Tagesspiegel in 2012 references sustained low-frequency emissions originating from beneath the former Wernicke sector. The memo's author, Major Thomas Klein, wrote, "Interference coincides annually with the date 9th December, duration approximately 3 minutes, identical frequency patterns to Stasi recorded data from 1962, recommend further investigation." His request was denied. Former Soviet personnel who worked on the excavation in the 1960s have provided limited testimony. An engineer named Yuri Kolesnik gave an interview to a Polish journalist in 1999. He described descending into corridors of polished concrete, perfectly dry, humming faintly as if alive. Kolesnik recalled massive generators with cables, running into the walls and rows of small rooms filled with metal chairs and broken equipment. When asked what they found deeper inside, he refused to answer, simply saying, "We heard the echoes first, then the order came to seal everything." He died 3 months later in unexplained circumstances. Today, only a handful of researchers continue to pursue the Wernicke mystery. One of them, physicist Dr. Anja Vogel of TU Dresden, believes the project represented an early attempt at what we now call brainwave entrainment, or psychophysical resonance technology. In a 2017 lecture, she noted that the equipment described in the recovered documents would have been capable of generating low-frequency electromagnetic fields strong enough to induce disorientation or nausea, possibly used to test psychological endurance. "The tragedy," she said, "is that if those tunnels were truly active, they were not abandoned for ethical reasons. They were abandoned because something went wrong." Every December 9th, local residents near the Harz still report strange phenomena. Radio static that flares into rhythmic pulses, lights flickering in unison, and vibrations felt beneath the soil. Seismographs record small tremors, identical in timing and frequency each year. Scientists dismiss it as coincidence, seasonal ground movement, or mining residue. Yet for those who have studied Project Wernicke, the pattern feels like a pulse that refuses to die. Whether the Wernicke tunnels housed an unfinished psychological weapon, an electromagnetic experiment gone awry, or merely the delusions of a collapsing regime, the evidence remains buried under tons of rock and decades of denial. But the documents, the radiation traces, and the annual vibrations whisper a darker story. That deep within the hearts, something once designed to manipulate human minds continues to hum in the dark, an echo from a war that never truly ended. Chapter 4: The Manila Extraction, File 47A. In the humid dawn of February 1946, the US Army's 525th Reconnaissance Company rolled into the ruins of Manila under direct orders from General Douglas MacArthur. The city was a fractured skeleton, half drowned in mud, half scorched by artillery. But somewhere within its shattered government quarter lay a secret MacArthur refused to entrust to the incoming Philippine administration. The mission bore no insignia, no public record. Its codename, Operation Perseus. The objective, later buried under Classification File 47A, was described only as strategic cultural assets of Axis origin. In reality, it was something far more volatile. Months earlier, in late 1945, intercepted Japanese radio traffic referred to emergency vaults scattered across the Philippine archipelago, part of a secret program known as Kin no Yubi, the Golden Finger. Under this initiative, retreating imperial officers hid tons of looted treasure from Southeast Asia and experimental archives from Japan's notorious Unit 731. Washington's interest was immediate. The combination of wealth and biowarfare data was too valuable to leave for Soviet intelligence, who by 1946 were already deploying agents through the new post-war trade missions in Asia. MacArthur authorized a covert retrieval before formal independence would complicate jurisdiction. Operation Perseus began in January 1946 with a task group under Lieutenant Colonel Henry R. Madison, a decorated logistics officer transferred from the OSS Pacific Bureau. His team included 7 men, engineers, translators, and 1 intelligence operative whose identity remains redacted. They operated under cover of infrastructure recovery, setting up communications posts through the wreckage of Intramuros. According to a fragmentary after-action report declassified in 1978, Madison's unit established a perimeter around a bombed-out building, that once housed the Japanese Governor General's Treasury Office. Beneath it, they located a sealed tunnel leading into the Pasig River embankment, reinforced concrete lined with lead panels. Inside were 132 crates, each marked with the imperial chrysanthemum crest and a secondary marking in English, Orem PH-47A. Witness statements from 2 Filipino laborers later identified the contents as metal bars and glass cylinders filled with black fluid. Within hours, the site was declared off limits. MacArthur's personal adjutant, Colonel Sidney Huff, flew in from Tokyo and oversaw the transfer of the crates aboard a US Navy LST at Pier 7. The manifest listed the cargo as medical instruments for quarantine research. It departed for Okinawa under guard from the Office of Strategic Services' successor, the newly formed Strategic Services Unit, SSU. None of the listed personnel or the ship's designation appears in naval archives today. Declassified memoranda from the State Department, Ref. SDPN 1142, shed faint light on what followed. A cable dated March 9, 1946, from MacArthur's headquarters to Washington states, Perseus successful, all material secured, recommend immediate transfer to continental custody. Another, sent days later, reads, biological samples unstable, require containment. Disposal not advised until full analysis. The phrase biological samples is striking. Cross-referenced with surviving Japanese military medical records, it aligns with Unit 731's documented research into plague, anthrax, and human tissue preservation. The implication is that Manila had become an interim storage site for experimental biological material, awaiting repatriation to Japan, or evacuation before surrender. In 1951, the newly declassified Yamashita Treasure Hearings briefly touched upon gold and artifacts hidden by Japanese officers, but the biological component remained absent. That omission may not have been accidental. One line in an OSS Pacific document recovered decades later references material recovered from PH-47A secured under Project Paperclip protocols. Paperclip, of course, was the American operation to recruit German scientists after the war. That this same language appears in a Pacific context suggests an equivalent effort to secure Japanese scientific expertise, regardless of the moral cost. Only one surviving member of the recovery team, Captain Leonard Baines, ever spoke publicly. In a 1972 interview with a Manila Times journalist, Baines described the crates as breathing. He claimed faint hissing noises emanated from several as they were lifted onto the ship. The colonel told us to keep moving and not to look back, he said. Months later, when he attempted to publish his memoir, Echoes of Perseus, the US Department of Defense seized the manuscript under the National Security Act of 1947, citing classified material. Baines vanished the following year. In 1981, his widow received his dog tags and a small envelope stamped "Return to Sender." Officially, Operation Perseus never existed, yet fragments continue to surface. In 1999, an independent researcher named Maria del Rosario discovered a water-damaged ledger in the archives of the University of Santo Tomas, which had served as a Japanese internment camp during the war. The ledger's pages listed prisoner numbers alongside cargo references identical to those seen in Orem PH-47A manifests. One entry, dated February 3, 1945, the height of the Battle of Manila, contains a chilling note in Japanese: specimens secured. Await transfer via American Channel. When cross-referenced with war diaries from the 14th Area Army, historians identified signatures from known Unit 731 officers temporarily stationed in Manila to oversee evacuation of their research. Satellite imaging of the Pasig River zone in 2008 revealed collapsed substructures consistent with wartime tunnels. Local divers exploring nearby flooded sections reported debris matching early US Army packing materials. Among the finds were fragments of glass cylinders coated internally with residue later identified as phenol, commonly used in tissue preservation. Radiation and biohazard readings forced a halt to exploration, though unofficial accounts suggest US Navy representatives quietly removed several artifacts shortly thereafter. In 2017, declassified CIA cables referenced residual asset Manila 47A. The brief description contained biological archive secured under tri-service custody. Relocation completed 1958 to Dugway facility. Dugway Proving Ground, located in Utah, was known for chemical and biological weapons testing during the Cold War. The cable confirms that at least part of the Manila material was transferred to the United States under covert channels. What became of the rest remains unclear. Historians now view Operation Perseus as one of the earliest and least acknowledged intersections between wartime plunder and post-war scientific exploitation. It linked gold, genocide, and geopolitics under a single classified umbrella. The recovered crates may have included not only biological research but also Imperial Japan's financial reserves, gold bullion intended to fund covert anti-communist operations in Asia. This interpretation aligns with reports of US Black Fund financing during the early Korean War, traced through Swiss intermediary banks beginning in 1949. The sums correspond uncannily to estimates of missing gold from the Arum crates. Today, the US Embassy in Manila officially denies possession of any wartime biological or financial assets originating from Japanese sources. Yet under the Freedom of Information Act, several documents remain withheld for reasons of national defense. Among them, a 1947 memorandum titled SSU Pacific Transfer Order 47 ASI. Its final line reads, "Storage site to remain unmarked. For retrieval upon authorization, MacArthur only." The ruins of the old Governor General's treasury still stand, sealed behind a wall of river silt and traffic. Beneath it, historians suspect, remnants of the tunnel persist, an invisible scar running beneath the rebuilt city. Locals claim that during low tide, air bubbles rise from the cracked pavement, smelling faintly of formalin. The city moves on above it, unaware that under its feet sleeps one of the dirtiest secrets of the post-war era, a cargo of stolen gold and human suffering, delivered into silence by the victors themselves. File 47A remains missing. The only trace is a reference line scribbled in the margin of a declassified naval manifest. Arum secured. Awaiting transport. Perseus concluded. Nothing more. No coordinates, no closure. Just a line of ink, fading like the tide that once washed against the tunnel's lead-lined walls. Chapter 5. Ghost Frequencies of the Baltic Sea. The Baltic, cold and grey, has long been a graveyard of steel. Beneath its waves lie the bones of fleets, mines, and wrecked empires. But one anomaly continues to elude both science and military history. A rhythmic signal pulsing through the radio static, repeating every 22 hours since the mid-1950s. It has no call sign, no origin coordinates, and no verifiable operator. Among naval intelligence circles, it became known simply as the Baltic Ghost. The first record appears in a Swedish Navy report from June 1954. Coastal. Radar operators stationed at Härnösand detected an intermittent frequency of 1356. MHs emanating from somewhere between Gotland and the Gulf of Finland. At first, the analysts believed it to be Soviet naval communications, but the signal carried no recognizable encryption pattern or modulation format. More troubling was its persistence. The transmission would last precisely 7 minutes, pause, then resume 22 hours later to the second. Attempts to triangulate the source failed due to unpredictable shifts in propagation strength, as if the origin was submerged or mobile. Declassified minutes from a 1956 NATO communications briefing in Brussels mention unknown maritime transmission, Vega channel. The term Vega appeared in Soviet naval logs as well, specifically in references to a facility codenamed Stancija Vega, thought to have been a submerged communications relay inherited from wartime German research. Polish and East German records describe Vega as a legacy of Operation Donnerschlag, Thunderclap, an abortive 1944 German project to deploy long-range acoustic and electromagnetic transmitters across the Baltic to coordinate experimental missile launches from Peenemünde. When the Red Army seized the Baltic coast in 1945, much of the infrastructure was scuttled, but Soviet engineers were known to have recovered several underwater masts near the island of Rügen. The theory that the Baltic Ghost was a remnant of Donnerschlag gained traction when Polish salvage divers in 1958 reported discovering a corroded steel pylon, 40 meters below the surface, topped with ceramic insulators and wiring. Their findings, submitted to the Polish Navy under Report 11870, were confiscated immediately by Soviet advisors. Subsequent attempts to revisit the site were blocked. The Soviets declared the area a restricted military zone, citing unexploded ordnance. But shortly afterward, Swedish civilian radio operators recorded a spike in signal strength matching the 13.56 MHz frequency, strongest exactly 48 hours after the Polish report was filed. By 1960, NATO Command classified the phenomenon under the internal designation EchoNet anomaly. That same year, the US Navy dispatched a reconnaissance trawler, the USNS Clift, to survey the suspected coordinates under cover of oceanographic research. The ship's logs, released decades later, describe a sudden failure of all electronic systems when approaching the designated zone. Compasses spun uncontrollably, power fluctuated, and crew members complained of nausea and headaches. Within hours, several sailors exhibited blister-like burns on exposed skin. Radiation dosimeters later showed elevated readings consistent with residual contamination, but not from fission sources. The equipment registered strong electromagnetic pulses at regular intervals. The mission was terminated, and the recovered data sealed under US Navy File C713 Bolt. The Soviets, meanwhile, continued their own investigation. A 1962 memorandum from the Leningrad Naval Institute refers to continuing emissions from subsector Vega, origin undetermined. One entry notes, signal consistent with German pre-war Tesla-type frequency generators. Potential weaponized communication system. Recommends suppression. Subsequent Soviet maps of the area show a redacted rectangular zone east of Gotland, marked only with the notation "nie aktivni", not active. Yet in 1973, Swedish fishermen reported a bright blue glow rising from beneath the water there, followed by a deep humming noise audible even above the surf. The Swedish Navy dispatched 2 minesweepers to investigate but found nothing. The incident was filed as natural bioluminescence. Interest in the Baltic ghost resurfaced in 1998 when a joint Swedish-Finnish research expedition, led by Professor Olof Bergström, detected a rusted communications mast protruding from the seabed, eerily similar to the structure described in the 1958 Polish report. Sonar imaging revealed a large metallic complex beneath it, extending nearly 60 meters long, resembling a submerged bunker or substation. When the team attempted to approach with an ROV, the camera feed distorted with severe electromagnetic interference. For 43 seconds before losing contact, the equipment captured what looked like rows of cylindrical modules along a corridor, faintly illuminated. Then the signal cut. The ROV never functioned again. In 2002, the European Union's environmental survey teams, unaware of the site's past, recorded unexplained broadband interference during routine seabed mapping. Their instruments detected low-frequency pulsations, always at 1356 MHz, still active after half a century. Modern analysis determined the source could not be natural or incidental. The emissions followed a perfect 22-hour, 4-minute cycle with microsecond precision, suggesting either an automated system or a feedback loop running autonomously since the war. Among classified NATO archives declassified in 2015, an internal report titled Residual Axis Assets, Maritime Sector 4C, references unconfirmed autonomous transmitters left operational post-1945. Probable origin, Peenemünde Auxiliary Network. One passage mentions a possible resonance field generator, allegedly capable of broadcasting encrypted VLF, very low-frequency communication to U-boats at extreme depths. However, physicists reviewing the data noted the power requirements were far beyond what a submerged generator could sustain for even months, let alone decades. Today, the Baltic Ghost continues to transmit. Amateur radio enthusiasts track its signal and post recordings online. A low, rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat, followed by a faint pattern resembling Morse code. The sequence repeats endlessly, but the code resists decryption. Linguists have suggested the spacing could correspond to time-stamped telemetry rather than language. Others believe it was once an encoded distress signal, repeating the final broadcast of a doomed installation. Still, the timing, precise, unwavering, implies automation, not desperation. In 2011, a joint German-Swedish scientific mission aboard the RV Seabird revisited the site with updated instrumentation. As they neared the coordinates, magnetometers spiked. A sudden, sharp tone filled the monitoring speakers, a continuous, rising frequency. Then silence. All data from the vessel's computers was later found corrupted beyond recovery. The crew described the sensation of pressure in their skulls, as if the sea itself vibrated. Within weeks, 2 members of the expedition reported persistent tinnitus and headaches. One was later diagnosed with unexplained inner ear damage. Subsequent expeditions were denied funding. NATO's official stance labels the signal a radio anomaly of unknown origin, non-hostile. Yet whispers persist within the intelligence community that the emissions serve as a passive encryption key, a remnant of a lost wartime network still holding open a channel no one remembers how to close. Files recovered from an abandoned Soviet listening station in Kaliningrad support this view. Transcripts from 1965 to 1987 contain repeated notations reading simply, Vega stable, channel open. Modern sonar surveys reveal a metallic dome partially embedded in the seabed near the original coordinates. It is likely the remains of a Donnerschlag relay hub, perhaps still powered by decaying chemical cells, or an experimental magneto-hydrodynamic generator. But how it continues to function, self-sustaining and unmonitored for nearly 70 years, remains unsolved. Some researchers propose it operates on resonance with the Earth's magnetic field, harvesting natural energy. Others dismiss it as a technological ghost, an artifact of Cold War paranoia echoing into the modern era. Whatever its source, the Baltic ghost endures. Each night, as the Northern Sea turns black beneath its frozen sky, radio operators still hear the pulse. 7 minutes, then silence for 22 hours. Its pattern has never drifted, not once in 70 years. Somewhere beneath the waves, the machinery of a forgotten war hums on, refusing to die. And as long as it does, the waters of the Baltic will whisper in coded rhythm, guarding the last heartbeat of the Reich's final experiment. A signal meant for no one that will not stop calling. The signal still hums beneath the ice, its pulse steady as a heartbeat from another century. Each generation of analysts and historians believes they can decode it, silence it, or explain it. But every attempt ends in the same way: interference, corruption, or disappearance. From the frozen convoys of the North Sea to the sealed tunnels of Manila, from the Arctic satellites that never launched to the Baltic towers that still breathe, the evidence forms a single thread, an invisible network of desperation, ambition, and denial that the victors buried but never truly erased. Somewhere, in a forgotten archive or a deep-sea ruin, the final transmission waits to be received. And when it is, history may have to be rewritten, not by what was found, but by what was never meant to stop speaking.